Now, I did not know that Norway was the first one to get rid of capital punishment. Interesting. But, happy 4th of July, everyone. Independence Day for those of us in the United States. And Thursday for the rest of the world. And Insurrection Day. For England, I guess. I may or may not be drinking tea. But we are doing more stories from England. Because that is where the rivals of Sherlock Holmes were. Hey, Guilty, welcome in. So bad are the fireworks in your area, or are they even allowed? I'd say, yeah, around here it's a case of, is it fireworks or is it gunfire? Well, you never know. This is this is Texas, and we like shooting guns off in the air anyway. But yeah. Independence Day. Fireworks stands are not allowed inside city limits, and technically fireworks aren't supposed to be set off in city limits without a permit. So, of course, we're going to be hearing explosions all night during my reading. Happening at your window? Damn. And I can usually see them outside my window because people across the street are shooting them off in their backyards. So there will be a lot of explosions probably audible during my stream. Along with the mini bikes that were driving along the street last week. I'm just glad that the fans aren't too loud. A Girafrig. Oh, well, raining, yeah, that will at least make it a little bit harder to do fireworks. I wish it were raining here, but instead it's just annoyingly humid. Kind of glad my fan isn't loud. No, I haven't been needing it as much today since it's only gotten into the 80s, but it's still hot. My 76 and pouring. That's not bad. I think well, I can't check my phone because I'm using my phone. Man. don't think he got out of the 90s today. Well, I don't think he got into the 90s. Let me see what it says it is currently. My phone says it is currently 82 degrees. And it's somewhat cloudy, so that should deafen the sound of the fireworks a little, except the ones in my neighborhood, which are just going to be loud anyway. Like those. Yeah. Oh, they scared at least one tree worth of birds. I feel like I need to put a note up saying fireworks in the background. Now, they'll see which day I'm streaming and they'll know what's going on, I hope. I don't know why people do 1812, because that had nothing to do with the Revolutionary War. But anyway, why am I sitting up so high? Okay. But we are doing more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes tonight. And I think all my sound alerts are working. Of course I didn't hear it. It was working fine earlier. I don't know what's this sound alerts that does it. Okay. I don't know. I'll never figure out sound words. But it's been... Nope, there's some more. Yeah. We're gonna have random explosions in the background tonight. Lovely. Hopefully they won't be too loud. We're starting a completely different detective tonight. Let's see how many stories I'm going to read in this one. 2 stories. Good to know. So, that's almost time. I think I'll go ahead and get into it. We're definitely going to be hearing explosions through this reading. It'd be great if they were, timed with things going on in the stories, but that would be asking far too much. I'm half tempted to watch the fireworks on PBS while I'm streaming, but that would get me distracted. Anyway, as I said, we are starting a new author tonight. It's Grant Allen. And they apparently have a series of stories. So, I'm going to start each read with the title, author, and episode, because this one apparently likes doing episodic writing. And, of course, continuous fireworks. I mean, it's not even dark yet, and people are already setting off fireworks. So, our first story for the night. An African Millionaire by Grant Allen. Number 1. The episode of the Mexican Seer. My name is Seymour Wilbraham Wentworth. I'm brother-in-law to the secretary to Sir Charles Vandrift, the South African millionaire, and famous financier. Many years ago, when Charlie Vandrift was a small lawyer in Cape Town, I had the qualified good fortune to marry his sister. Much later, when the Vandrift estate and farm near Kimberley developed by degrees into a Cloaderturp Golcondas Limited, my brother-in-law offered me the not unremunerative post of secretary, in which capacity I have ever since been his constant and attached companion. He is not a man whom any common sharper can take in, is Charles Vandrift. Middle height, square build, firm mouth, keen eyes, the very picture of a sharp and successful business genius. I have only known one rogue impose upon Sir Charles, and that one rogue, as the commissary of police, that's nice, remarked, would doubtless have imposed upon a syndicate of Vidocq, Robert Houdin, and Cagliostro. We had run across the Riviera for a few weeks in the season, our object being strictly rest and recreation from the arduous duties of a financial combination. We did not think it necessary to take our wives out with us. Indeed, Lady Vandrift is absolutely wedded to the joys of London, and does not appreciate the rural delights of the Mediterranean littoral. But Sir Charles and I, though immersed in affairs when at home, both thoroughly enjoy the complete change from the city to the charming vegetation and pellucid air of the terrace at Monte Carlo. We're so very fond of scenery. That delicious view over the rocks of Monaco, on with the maritime Alps in the air, and the blue sea in front, not to mention the imposing casino in the foreground, appeals to me as one of the most beautiful prospects in all of Europe. Sir Charles has a sentimental attachment to the place. He finds it restores and refreshes him, after the turmoil in London, to win a few hundred at roulette in the course of the afternoon among the palms and cactuses and pure breezes of Monte Carlo. The country, say I, for the jaded intellect. However, we never on any account actually stop in the principality itself. Sir Charles thinks Monte Carlo is not a sound address for financiers' letters. He prefers a comfortable hotel on the Promenade d'Anglais et Nice, where he recovers health and renovates his nervous system by taking daily excursions along the coast to the casinos. This particular season we were snugly ensconced at the Hotel d'Anglais. We had capital quarters on the first floor, salon, study, and bedrooms, and found on the spot a most agreeable cosmopolitan society. All Nice, just then, was ringing with talk about a curious impostor, known to his followers as the Great Mexican Seer, and supposed to be gifted with second sight, as well as with endless other supernatural powers. Now, in this particularity of my able brother-in-law, that when he meets with a quack, He burns to expose him. He is so keen a man of business himself that it gives him, so to speak, a disinterested pleasure to unmask and detect impostures in others. Many ladies at the hotel, some of whom had met and conversed with the Mexican Seer, were constantly telling us strange stories of his doings. He had disclosed to one the presence, whereabouts of a runaway husband. He had pointed out to another the numbers that would win at roulette the next evening. He had shown a third the image on a screen of a man she had for many years adored without his knowledge. Of course, Sir Charles didn't believe a word of it, but his curiosity was roused. He wished to see and judge for himself of the wonderful thought reader. What would be his terms, do you think, for a private seance? He asked of Madame Picaret, the lady to whom the Seer had successfully predicted the winning numbers. He does not work for money, Madame Picaret answered, but for the good of humanity. I'm sure he would gladly come to an exhibit for nothing his miraculous festivities. Nonsense, Sir Charles answered. The man must live. I'd pay him 5 guineas, though, to see him alone. What hotel is he stopping at? The Cosmopolitan, I think, said the lady. Oh, no, I remember now. The Westminster. Sir Charles turned to me quietly. Look here, Seymour, he whispered. Go around to this fellow's place immediately after dinner and offer him £5 to give a private seance at once in our rooms, without mentioning who I am to him. Keep the name quite quiet. Bring him back with you, too, and come straight upstairs with him, so that there may be no collusion. We'll see just how much this fellow can tell us. I went as directed. I found the Seer a very remarkable and interesting person. He stood about Sir Charles's own height, but was slimmer and straighter, with an aquiline nose, strangely piercing eyes, very large black pupils, and a finely chiseled, close-shaven face like the bust of Antonius in our hall in Mayfair. What gave him his most characteristic touch, however, was his odd head of hair, curly and wavy like Paderewski's, standing out in a halo around his high white forehead and his delicate profile. I could see at a glance where he succeeded so well in impressing women. He had the look of a poet, a singer, and a prophet. I've come round, I said, to ask whether you will consent to give a seance at once in my friend's room, and my principal wishes me to add that he is prepared to pay £5 at the price of entertainment. Senor Antonio Herrera, that was what he called himself, bowed to me with an impressive Spanish politeness. His dusky olive cheeks were wrinkled with a smile of genteel contempt as he answered gravely, I do not sell my gifts. I bestow them freely. If your friend, your anonymous friend, desires to behold the cosmic wonders that are wrought through my hands, I am glad to show them to him. Fortunately, as often happens when it is necessary to convince and confound a skeptic, for that your friend is a skeptic I feel instinctively, I chance to have no engagements at all this evening. He ran his hand through his fine long hair reflectively. Yes, I go, he continued, as if addressing some unknown presence that hovered about the ceiling. I go. Come with me. Then he put on his broad sombrero, with its crimson ribbon, wrapped a cloak around his shoulders, lighted a cigarette, and strode forth by my side towards the Hotel de l'Anglaise. He walked little by the way, and that little in curt sentences. He seemed buried in deep thought. Indeed, when we reached the door and I turned in, his step walked a step or two farther on, as if not noticing to the place I had brought him. Then he drew himself up short and gazed about him for a moment. "Ah, the Anglais," he said. And I may mention in passing that his English, in spite of a slight southern accent, was idiomatic and excellent. "It is here, then. It is here." He was addressing once more the unseen presence. I smiled to think that these childish devices were intended to deceive Sir Charles Vandrift. Not quite the sort of man, as the city of London knows, to be taken in by hocus pocus. All of this, I saw, was the cheapest and most commonplace conjurer's patter. We went upstairs to our rooms. Charles had gathered together a few friends to watch the performance. The seer entered, wrapped in thought. He was in evening dress, but a red sash around his waist gave a touch of picturesqueness and a dash of color. He paused for a moment in the middle of the salon without letting his eyes rest on anybody or anything. Then he walked straight up to Charles and held out his dark hand. "Good evening, sir," he said. "You are the host. My soul's sight tells me so." "Good shot," Sir Charles answered. "These fellows have been quick-witted, you know. Mrs. Mackenzie, or they'd never get on. The seer gazed about him and smiled blankly at a person or two whose faces he seemed to recognize from a previous existence. Then Charles began to ask him a few simple questions, not about himself, but about me, just to test him. He answered most of them surprisingly correctly. His name begins with an S, I think. You call him Seymour. They paused long with each clause, as if the facts were revealed to him slowly. "Seymour Wilbraham, Earl of Stafford." "No, not Earl of Stafford. Seymour Willingham, Wentworth. There seems to be some connection in somebody's mind it now presents between Wentworth and Stafford. I am not English. I do not know what it means. But they are somehow the same name, Wentworth and Stafford." He gazed around apparently for confirmation. A lady came to his rescue. "Wentworth was the surname of the great Earl of Strafford," she murmured gently, "and I was wondering as you spoke whether Miss Wentworth might possibly be descended from him." "He is," the seer replied instantly, with a flash of those dark eyes. And I thought this curious, for though my father always maintained the reality of the relationship, there was one link wanting to complete the pedigree. He could not make sure that the Honorable Thomas Wilbraham Wentworth was the father of Jonathan Wentworth, the Bristol horse dealer from whom we were descended. "Where was I born?" Sir Charles interrupted, coming suddenly to his own case. The seer clapped his two hands to his forehead and held it between them, and as if to prevent it from bursting. "Africa," he said slowly, and the facts narrowed to him, so to speak. "South Africa, Cape of Good Hope, Johnsonville, Dewitt Street, 1840. "By Jove, he's correct," Sir Charles muttered. "He always seems to do it. Still, he may have found me out. He may have known where he was coming." "I never gave a hint," I answered. "Till we reached the door. He didn't even know what hotel I was piloting him to." The seer stroked his chin softly. His eye appeared to me to have a furtive gleam in it. "Would you like to tell me the number of the bank note enclosed in an envelope?" he asked casually. "Go out of the room," Sir Charles said. "I will pass it around the company." Signor Herrera disappeared. Sir Charles passed it around cautiously, holding it all the time in his own hand, but letting his guests see the number. Then he placed it in an envelope and gummed it down firmly. The seer returned. His keen eyes swept the company with a comprehensive glance. He shook his shaggy mane. Then he took the envelope in his hands and gazed at it fixedly. AF 73549, he answered in a slow tone. A Bank of England note for £50, exchanged at the casino for gold one yesterday at Monte Carlo. I see how he did that, Sir Charles said triumphantly. He must have changed it there himself, and then I changed it back again. In point of fact, I remember seeing the fellow with long hair loafing about. Still, it's capital conjuring. He can see through matter, one of the ladies interposed. It was Madame Percadet. He can see through a box. She drew a little gold vignettes, such as our grandmothers used, from her dress pocket. What is in this? She inquired, holding it up to him. Senor Herrera gazed through it. 3 gold coins, he replied, knitting his brows with the efforts of seeing into the box. 1, an American $5. 1, a French 10-franc piece. 1, 20 marks German, of the Emperor William. She opened the box and passed it around. Sir Charles smiled a quiet smile. Confederacy, he muttered half to himself. Confederacy. The seer turned to him with a sullen air. You'll want to see a better sign, he said, in a very impressive voice. A sign that will convince you. Very well. You have a letter in your left waistcoat pocket, a crumpled-up letter. Do you wish me to read it out loud? I will if you desire it. It may seem to those who know Sir Charles incredible, but I am bound to admit my brother-in-law colored. What that letter contained, I cannot say. He only answered very testily and evasively, No, thank you, I won't trouble you. The exhibition you've given us of your skill is quite more than amply suffices. And his fingers traced nervously to his waistcoat pocket, as if there was half afraid even then Senor Herrera could read it. I fancied, too, he glanced somewhat anxiously towards Madame Percadet. The seer bowed courteously. Your will, Senor, is law, he said. I make it a principle, though. I can see through all things invariably to respect the secrecies and sanctities. If it were not so, I might dissolve society. For which of us is there who could not bear the whole truth being told about him? He gazed around the room. An unpleasant thrill supervened. Most of us felt this uncanny Spanish-American knew really too much, and some of us were engaged in financial operations. For example, the seer continued bluntly, I happened to see a few weeks ago a travel down here from Paris by train with a very important, intelligent man, a company promoter. He had in his bag some documents, some confidential documents. He glanced at Sir Charles. You know what kind of thing, my dear sir. Reports of experts, of mining engineers. You may have seen such, marked strictly private. They form an element of high finance, Sir Charles admitted coldly. Precisely, the seer murmured, his accent for the moment less Spanish than before. And, as they were marked strictly private, I respect, of course, the seal of confidence. That's all I wish to say. I hold it a duty, being trusted with such powers, not to use them in a manner which may annoy or incommode my fellow creatures. Your feeling does you honor, Sir Charles answered with some acerbity. Then he whispered in my ear, Confounded clever scoundrel, say. Rather wish we hadn't brought him here. Senor Herrera seemed attentively to divine this wish, for he interposed in a lighter and gayer tone. I will now show you a different and more interesting embodiment of occult power, for which she shall need a somewhat subdued arrangement of surrounding lights. Would you mind, Senor Host, for I have purposely abstained from reading your name on the brain of anyone present. Would you mind my turning down this lamp just a little? So, that will do. Now, this one and that one. Exactly, that's right. He poured a few grains of powder out of a packet into a saucer. Next, a match if you please. Thank you. It burnt with a strange green light. He drew from his pocket a card and produced a little ink bottle. Have you a pen? He asked. I instantly brought one. He handed it to Sir Charles. Oblige me, he said, by writing your name there. And he indicated a place on the center of the card, which had an embossed edge, with a small middle square of a different color. Sir Charles has a natural disinclination to signing his name without knowing why. What do you want with it? He asked. A millionaire signature has so many uses. I want you to put the card in the envelope, the Seer said, and then to burn it. After that, I shall show your own name written in the letters of blood on my arm, in your own handwriting. Sir Charles took the pen. If the signature was to be burned as soon as it finished, he didn't mind giving it. He wrote his name in his usual firm, clear style, the writing of a man who knows his worth and is not afraid of drawing a check for 5,000. Look at it long, the Seer said from the other side of the room. He had not watched him write it. Sir Charles stared at it fixedly. The Seer was really beginning to produce an impression. Now, put it in that envelope, the Seer exclaimed. Sir Charles, like a lamb, placed it as directed. The Seer strode up. Give me the envelope, he said. He took it in his hand, walked towards the fireplace, and solemnly burnt it. See, it crumbles into ashes, he cried. Then he came back to the middle of the room, close to the green light, rolled up his sleeve, and held his arm before Sir Charles. There, in blood-red letters, my brother-in-law read his names. Charles Vandrift, in his own handwriting. I see how that's done, Sir Charles murmured, drawing back. It's a clever delusion, but still, I see through it. That's ghost book. Your ink was a deep green. Your light was green. You made me look at it long, and then I saw the name being written on your skin in the same arm in the complementary colors. You think so? The Seer replied with a curious curl of the lip. I'm sure of it, Sir Charles answered. Quick as lightning, the Seer again rolled up his sleeve. That's your name, he cried, in a very clear voice, but not your whole name. What do you say then to my right? And this also a complementary color. He held out his other arm. There, in sea green letters, I read the name Charles O'Sullivan Vandrift. It was my brother-in-law's full baptismal designation. But he has dropped the O'Sullivan for many years past, as to say the truth, he doesn't like it. He is a little bit ashamed of his mother's family. Charles glanced at it hurriedly. Quite right, he said. Quite right. But his voice was hollow. I could guess he didn't care to continue the seance. He could see through the man, of course, but it was clear the fellow knew too much about us to be entirely pleasant. Turn up the lights, I said, and turned the servant. Shall I say coffee and Benedictine? I whispered to Vandrift. By all means, he answered. Anything to keep this fellow from further impertinences. And I say, don't you think you'd better suggest the same time that these men should smoke? Even the ladies are not above a cigarette, some of them. There was a sigh of relief. The lights burned brightly. The Seer for a moment retired from business, so to speak, accepted a partega, and with a very good grace, sipped his coffee in a corner, and chatted to the lady who suggested Strafford with marked politeness. He was a polished gentleman. Next morning, in the hall of the hotel, I saw Madame Pickard again, in a neat tailor-made traveling dress, evidently bound for the railway station. What, off, Madame Pickard? I cried. She smiled and held out her pretty gloved hand. Yes, I'm off, she answered. Florence or Rome or somewhere. I've drained nice dry, like a sucked orange. Got all the fun I can out of it. Now I'll be away again to my lovely Italy. But it struck me as odd that if Italy was her game, she went by ominous which takes down to the train de luxe for Paris. However, a man of the world accepts what a lady tells him, no matter how improbable. And I confess, for 10 days or so, I thought no more of her, or the Seer either. At the end of that time, our fortnightly passbook came in for the Bank of London. It is a part of my duty as a Millionaire secretary to make up his book once a fortnight and to compare the cancelled checks with Sir Charles's counterfoils. On this particular occasion, I happened to observe what I can only describe was a very grave discrepancy. In fact, the discrepancy was £5,000. On the wrong side, too. Sir Charles was debted with £5,000 more than the total amount of what was shown in the counterfoils. I examined the book with care. The source of the error was obvious. It lay as a cheque to self from a bearer for £5,000, signed by Sir Charles, and evidently paid across the counter in London, as it bore on its face no stamp or indication of any other office. I called in my brother-in-law from the salon to the study. "Look here, Charles," I said. "There's a cheque in the book which you haven't entered." And I handed it to him without comment, for I thought it might have been drawn to settle some little loss on the turf or the cards, and to make up some other affair he didn't desire to mention to me. These things, will happen. He looked at it and stared hard. Then he pursed his mouth and gave a long, low whew. At last he turned it over and remarked, "I say, my boy, we've just done jolly well brown, haven't we?" I glanced at the cheque. "How do you mean?" I inquired. "Why, the Seer," he replied, still staring at it ruefully. "I don't mind the 5 thou, but to think a fellow should have gammoned a pair of us like that, ignominious, I dare say it." "How do you know it was the Seer?" I asked. "Look at the green ink," he answered. "Besides, I recollect the very shape of the last flourish. I flourished a bit like that in excitement at the moment, which I don't always do in my regular signature." "He's done us," I answered, recognizing it. "But how the dickens did he manage to transfer it to a cheque? This looks like your own handwriting, Charles, not a clever forgery." "It is," he said. "I admit it. I can't deny it. Only fancy this bamboozling me when I was the most on my guard. I can't be taken in by any silly occult tricks or catchwords. But it never occurred to me that he was doing to victimize me financially in this way. I expected attempts at a loan or an extortion. But to color my signature on a blank cheque? Atrocious." "How did he manage it?" I asked. "I haven't the faintest conception. I only know that these words I wrote. I could swear to them anywhere." "Then you can't protest the cheque?" "Unfortunately, no. It is my own true signature." We went that afternoon without delay to the chief commissary of police at the office. He was a gentlemanly Frenchman, much less formal and red-tapery than usual, and he spoke with an excellent English, with an American accent, having acted, in fact, as a detective in New York for about 10 years in his early manhood. "I guess," he said slowly after hearing our story, "you've been victimized right here by Colonel Clay, gentlemen." "Who is Colonel Clay?" Sir Charles asked. "That's just what I want to know," the commissary answered, in his curious American-French English. "He is a colonel because he occasionally gives himself a commission. He is called Colonel Clay because he appears to possess an india-rubbered face, and he could mold it like clay in the hands of the potter. Real name unknown. Nationality equally French and English. Address usually Europe. Profession former maker of wax figures in the Musée Grévin. Age what he chooses. He employs his knowledge to mold his own nose and cheeks with wax additions to the character he desires to impersonate. Aquiline this time, you say? Fine. Anything like these photographs? He rummaged on his desk and handed us two. Not in the least, Sir Charles answered. Except perhaps as to the neck. Anything here is quite unlike him. Then that's the Colonel, the commissary answered with decision, rubbing his hands in glee. Look here. And he took out a pencil and rapidly sketched the outline of one of the two faces. That of a bland-looking young man with no expression worth mentioning. There's the Colonel in his simple disguise. Very good. Now watch me. Figure to yourself that he adds here a little patch of wax to the nose, an aquiline bridge, just so. Well, you have him right there. And the chin, one touch. Now for the hair, the wig, for complexion, nothing easier. That's the profile of your rascal, isn't it? Exactly, we both murmured. By two curves of the pencil and the shock of false hair, the face was transmuted. He had very large eyes with big pupils, though, I objected, looking close. And the man in the photograph here has them small and old fishy. That's so, the commissary answered. A drop of belladonna expands and produces the seer. 5 grains of opium contract and give a dead alive, stupidly innocent appearance. Well, you leave this affair to me, gentlemen. I'll see the fun out. I don't say I'll catch him for you. Nobody has yet caught Colonel Clay. But I'll explain how he did the trick, and that ought to be consolation enough for a man of your means, for a trifle of 5,000. You are not a conventional French office holder, Master the Commissaire, I ventured to interpose. You bet, the commissary replied, and drew himself up like a captain of infantry. Monsieurs, he continued in French with the most dignity, I shall devote my resources to the office of tracing out the crime, and, if possible, to effectuating the arrest of the capable. We telegraphed to London, of course. We wrote to the bank with a full description of the suspected person, but I need hardly add that nothing came of it. 3 days later, the commissary called our hotel. Well, gentlemen, he said, I'm glad to say that I've discovered everything. What? Arrested the seer, Sir Charles said. The commissary drew back, almost horrified at the suggestion. Arrest Colonel Clay, he exclaimed. Monsieur, we are only human. Arrested him? No, not quite. But tracked out how he did it. That is already much. To unravel Colonel Clay, gentlemen. Well, what do you make of it? Sir Charles asked, crestfallen. The commissary sat down and gloated over his discovery. It was a clear, well-planned crime, amused him vastly. In the first place, monsieur, he said, disabuse your mind of the idea that when monsieur, your secretary, went out to fetch Senor Herrera that night, Senor Herrera didn't know who those rooms he was coming. Quite otherwise, in point of fact. I do not doubt myself that Senor Herrera, or Colonel Clay, call him whichever you like, came to Nice in his winters for no other purpose than just to rob you. But I sent for him, my brother-in-law interposed. Yes, he meant you to send for him. He couldn't have forced a card, so to speak. If he couldn't do that, I guess he would be a pretty poor conjurer. He had a lady of his own, his wife, let's say, or his sister, stopping here at this hotel. A certain Madame Picardet. Through her, he induced several ladies in your circle to attend the seances. She and they spoke to you about him, and aroused your curiosity. You may bet your bottom dollar that when he came to this room, he already primed and prepared with endless facts about the both of you. What fools we've been, say, my brother-in-law exclaimed. I see it all now. That designing woman sent around before dinner to say I wanted to meet him. And by that time you got there, he was already bamboozling me. That's so, the commissary answered. He had your name already painted on both his arms, and he had made other preparations of still greater importance. You mean the check? Well, how did he get it? The commissary opened the door. Come in, he said. A young man entered, whom we recognized at once as the chief clerk for the foreign department of Credit Marseille, the principal bank of all along the Riviera. State what you know of this check, the commissary said, showing it to him. for we had handed it over to the police as a piece of evidence. About 4 weeks ago, the clerk began. Say, 10 days before your seance, the commissary interposed. A gentleman with very long, dark, and awkwardly nosed, dark, strange, and handsome, called in at my department and asked if I could tell him the name of Sir Charles Vandergrift's London banker. He had said he had a sum to pay in your credits, and asked if we would forward it to him. I told him it was irregular for us to receive the money, as you had no account with us, but that your lord bankers were Darby, Drummond, and Rothenberg, Limited. Quite right, Sir Charles murmured. 2 days later, a lady, Madame Pickardette, who was a customer of ours, brought in a good cheque for £3,000, signed by the first-rate name, and asked us to pay it in debt to Darby, Drummond, and Rothmans, and to open a London account with them for her. We did so, and received a reply chequebook, from which this cheque was taken, as I learned from the number, by telegram of London, the commissary put in. Also, that was the same day on which your cheque was cashed. Madame Pickardette in London withdrew her balance. How did you get the fellow to sign the cheque? Charles answered. How did he manage the card trick? The commissary produced a similar card from his pocket. Was that the sort of thing? He asked. Precisely, a facsimile. I thought so. Well, our colonel, I find, bought a packet of such cards, intended for admission to a religious function at a shop in Quai Massena. He cut out to the center, and see here, the commissary turned it over and showed a piece of paper pasted neatly over the back. This he tore off, and there, concealed behind it, lay a folded check, with only the place where the signature should be written showing through the face, which the seer had presented to us. I call that a neat trick, the commissary remarked, with professional enjoyment of a really good deception. But he burnt the envelope before my eyes, Sir Charles exclaimed. Phew, the commissioner answered. What would he be worth as a conjurer anyway, if he couldn't substitute one envelope for another between the table and the fireplace without your noticing it? And Colonel Clay, you remember, is a prince among conjurers. Well, it's a comfort to know we've been identified our man and woman who was with him, Charles said, with a slight sigh of relief. The next thing will be, of course, you'll follow him up on the clues in England and arrest him. The commissary shrugged his shoulders. Arrest them? He exclaimed, much amused. Oh, monsieur, but you are sanguine. No officer of justice has ever succeeded in arresting the Colonel Cacloche, as we call him in French. He is as slippery as an eel, that man. He wriggles through our fingers. Suppose even we caught him. What could we prove, I ask you? Nobody who has seen him once can ever swear to see him again in his next impersonation. He is impayable, this good colonel. On this day, when I arrest him, I assure you, monsieur, I shall consider myself the smartest police officer in Europe. Well, I shall catch him yet, Sir Charles answered, and relapsed into silence. Okay. So they're definitely launching a lot of fireworks across the street from me. I'm sure you may have heard them. So African Millionaires is centuries started somewhere. You're welcome in, Oni, and thank you for the head pats and the hydrate and stretch. So, how loudly are you guys hearing the fireworks? If anything else, I can close the window and that'll deaden it a little. I just wanted the window open for the breeze. Or is it just not that loud? Because I'm hearing him through my headset. That just sounds like popcorn. Did that play? I'm kind of curious. Oh, well. Guess we're gonna have ads run real quick. Whatever. Okay. Maybe I don't show up. What's not showing up? Okay. Anyway. I think I will go ahead and take a break, and I will tinker with Blurp a little bit. Ads are about to run anyway, so I'll see you in a few. Still running fireworks. I'm not muting myself, by the way. Okay, maybe that one will work. Okay, I'm just gonna say we're back. It's not giving me that timer for some reason. More fireworks, though. If anyone, I guess, has a subscription, Dusk gave me an update on my tail. Well, didn't give, but it was one of the things she did for the donations for charity. So it wags better and a lot smoother than my version of it did. Because it's mine versus one Dusk made. A lot smoother, a lot faster. Try that sound one more time just to see if it will do anything. At least want Eero to work. Oh, come on. Okay, well, that one works. Now the important one. Hey, Squall. So how many people were blowing stuff up around you? Yeah, sounds about right. That's what the random popping is that my phone's picking up. Well, my microphone's picking up. I'm not seeing any more pretty ones out my window. Oh, wait. That one was kind of low. Yeah. I've been hearing just fireworks tonight, too. Say, Guilty, who is probably lurking, might be at work right now, I don't know. They didn't say if they were going to work or not. At least he said it was raining, so he doesn't have to worry about the fireworks as much. But, you know, I'm seeing people setting these things off across the street. Holy crap. So whoever it is, one street over, apparently decided to get some mini mortars. So it looks like they're only going maybe 30 to 50 feet from where I can see. Just barely over the local tree chops, so. Oh, I can smell them in the air now. They're going to have to put a note on the VOD that this was recorded on July 4th. But again, at least it's fireworks and not gunshots. But anyway, since the ads are over, I guess I can get into the next story. Okay, that's just Roman candle. Okay, now we will get back to reading. So, An African Millionaire, Part 2, the episode of the Diamond Links. Let us take a trip to Switzerland, said Lady Van Drift. Anyone who knows anything about Amelia would not be surprised to learn that we did take a trip to Switzerland accordingly. Nobody can drive Sir Charles except his wife, and nobody at all can drive Amelia. There were difficulties on the outset, because we had not ordered rooms at the hotels beforehand, and as it was well in on the season, but they were overcome at last by the usual application of a golden key. And we found ourselves in due time pleasantly quartered in Lucerne, at that most comfortable of the European hostelries, the Schweizerhof. We were a square party of four, Sir Charles and Amelia, and myself and Isabel. We had nice big rooms on the first floor overlooking the lake, and as none of us had possessed with the faintest symptom of the incipient mania which shows itself in the form of an insane desire to climb a mountain of disagreeable steepness and unnecessary snowiness, I will venture to assert that we enjoyed ourselves. We spent most of our time sensibly and lounging about the lake on the jolly little steamers, and when we did a mountain climb, it was on the riggier Pt7, where an engine undertook all the muscular work for us. As usual, at the hotel, many miscellaneous people showed up with burning desire to be especially nice to us. If you wish to see how friendly and charming humanity is, just try being a well-known millionaire for a week, and you'll learn a thing or two. Wherever Sir Charles goes, he is surrounded by charming and disinterested people, all eager to make his distinguished acquaintance, and all familiar with several excellent investments or several deserving objects of Christian charity. In his and my business of life, and his brother-in-law and secretary, to decline with thanks the excellent investments, and to throw judicious cold water on the objects of charity. Even I myself, as the great man's almoner, am very much sought after. People casually allude before me to artless stories of poor curates in Cumberland, you know, Mr. Whitworth, or widows in Cornwall, penniless poets with epics in their desks, and young painters in need but the breath of a patron to open up the doors to admiring academy. I smile and look wise while I administer cold water in the minute doses, but I never report one of these cases to Sir Charles, except in the rare, almost unheard of events where I think it is really something in them. Welcome in, Taka. Ever since our little adventure with the Seer and Nice, Sir Charles, who's constitutionally cautious, had been even more careful about the possible sharpers. And, as chance would have it, there sat just opposite us, at a table hotel at the Switzerhof, 'tis the fad of Amelia's to dine with table d'hôte. She says she can bear to be boxed up all day in private rooms with too much family. A sinister-looking man with dark hair and eyes, conspicuous by his bushy, overhanging eyebrows. My attention was first called to the eyebrows in question by a nice little parson who sat at our side, and who observed that they were made up of certainly large and bristly hairs, which, he told us, had been traced by Darwin to our monkey ancestors. A very pleasant little fellow, this fresh-faced young parson on his honeymoon tour with a nice wee wife, a bonny Scotch lassie with a charming accent. I looked at the eyebrows close, and then a sudden thought struck me. Do you believe they're his own? I asked of the curate. Or are they only stuck on as a makeup disguise? They really almost look like it. You don't suppose, Charles began, and checked himself suddenly. Yes, I do, I answered. The Seer. Then I recollected my blunder and looked down sheepishly, for, to say the truth, Vandriff had straightfully enjoyed on me, long before, to say nothing of our painful little episode of Nice to Amelia. He was afraid if she heard it, he would never hear the end of it again after. What's Seer? The little parson inquired, with personal curiosity. I noticed the man with the overhanging eyebrows give a queer sort of start. Charles's glance was fixed upon me. I hardly knew what to answer. Oh, a man who was at Nice with us last year, I stammered out, trying hard to look unconcerned. A fellow they all talked about, that's all. I turned to the subject. But the curate, like a donkey, wouldn't let me turn it. You had eyebrows like that? He inquired in undertone. I was really angry. If this was Colonel Clay, the curate was obviously giving him a clue, and making it much more difficult for us to catch him. Now we might possibly have lighted on the chance of doing so. No, I hadn't, I answered testily. It was a passing expression, but this is not the man. I am mistaken, no doubt. And I nudged him gently. The little curate was too innocent for anything. Oh, I see, he replied, nodding and hard and looking wise. But then he turned to his wife and made an obvious face which the man with the eyebrows couldn't fail to notice. Fortunately, the political discussion going on in a few places further down the table spread up to us and diverted attention for the moment. The magical name of Gladstone saved us. Sir Charles flared up. I was truly pleased, for I could see Amelia was boiling over with curiosity by the time. After dinner, in the billiard room, however, the man with the big eyebrows sidled up and began to talk to me. If he was Colonel Clay, it was evidently he bore us no grudge at the fire for the £5,000, which he had done out of us. On the contrary, he seemed quite prepared to do us out of 5,000 more when the opportunity offered. for he introduced himself at once as Dr. Hector McPherson, the exclusive grantee of extensive concessions for the Brazilian government upon the upper Amazons. He dived into conversation with me at once as to the splendid mineral resources of his Brazilian estate, the silver, the platinum, the actual rubies, and the possible diamonds. I listened and smiled. I knew what was coming. All he needed to develop his magnificent concession was a little more capital. It was sad to see thousands of pounds worth of platinum and carloads of rubies just crumbling in the soil or carried away by the river, for want of a few hundreds to work them properly. If he knew of anybody now with money to invest, he could recommend them, nay, offer them a unique opportunity of earning, 40% on his capital on unimpeachable security. I would do it for every man, Dr. Hector McPherson remarked, drawing himself up, but I took a fancy to the fellow who had the command of ready cash. I might choose to put him in the way of feathering his nest with unexampled rapidity. Exceedingly disinterested of you, I answered dryly, fixing my eyes on his eyebrows. The little curate, meanwhile, was playing billiards with Sir Charles. His glance followed mine as he rested it for a moment on the monkey-like hairs. False, obviously false, he remarked with his lips, and I'm bound to confess I never saw any man speak so well by movement alone. You could follow every word, though not a sound escaped him. During the rest of that evening, Dr. Hector McPherson stuck to me as close as mustard plaster, and he was almost as irritating. I got heartily sick of the upper Amazons. I have positively waded in my time with the ruby mines, in prospectuses, I mean, till the mere sight of ruby absolutely sickens me. When Charles, in an unwanted fit of generosity, gave his sister, Isabel, to whom I had the honor of marry, a ruby necklace, inferior stones, I made Isabel change it for sapphires and amethysts on the judicious plea that they suited her complexion better. I scored one, incidentally, for having considered Isabel's complexion. By the time I went to bed, I was prepared to sink the upper Amazons into the sea, and to stab, shoot, poison, or otherwise seriously damage the man with the concession and the false eyebrows. For the next 3 days, at intervals, he returned to the charge. He bored me to death with his platinum and his rubies. He didn't want a capitalist who could personally exploit the thing. He would prefer to do it all on his own account, giving the capitalist preference to the ventures of his bogus company and a lien on the concession. I listened and smiled. I listened and yawned. I listened and was rude. I ceased to listen at all, but still he droned on with it. I fell asleep on the steamer one day and woke up in 10 minutes to hear him droning yet. And the yield of platinum per ton was certified to be... I forget how many pounds or ounces or pennyweights. These details, I would say, have ceased to interest me, like the man who didn't believe in ghosts. I have seen too many of them. The fresh-faced little curate and his wife, however, were quite the different people. He was a cricketing Oxford man. She was this breezy Scotch lash, with a wholesome breath of the Highlands about her. I called her White Heather. Their name was Pt7, millionaires who are accustomed to being beset by harpies of every description, that when they come across a young couple who are simple and natural, they delight in the purity of human relation. We picnicked and went on excursions a great deal with the honeymooners. They were so frank in their young love, and so proof against chaff, that we really all liked them. But wherever I called the pretty girl White Heather, she looked so shocked and cried, "Oh, Miss Wentworth!" Still, we were the best of friends. The curate offered to row us in a boat on the lake one day, while the Scotch lassie assured us she would take an oar almost as well as he did. However, we did not accept their offer, as rowboats exert an unfavorable influence upon Amelia's digestive organs. "Nice young fellow, that Rasmussen," Sir Charles said to me one day, as we lounged together on the quay. "Never talks about advancements or the next presentations. Doesn't seem to me to care two pins about promotion. Says he's quite content with his country currency, enough to live upon, and needs no more. And his wife has a little, very little money. I asked him about his poor today, and proposed to test him. Those parsons are always trying to screw something out of someone or one of their poor. Men in my position know the truth of the saying that we have the class of the population always with us. But would you believe it, he says that he hasn't any poor at all in his parish. They're all well-to-do farmers, or else well-able-bodied laborers, and his one terror is that someday someone will try to pauperize them. If a philanthropist were to give me £50 today and use it at Eppingham," he said, "I assure you, Sir Charles, I shouldn't know what to do with it. I think I should buy new dresses for Jessie, who wants them about as much as anybody else in the village. That is to say, not at all. There's a parson for you, say, my boy. I only wish we had one of this sort in Selden." "He certainly doesn't want to get anything out of you," I answered. That evening at dinner, a queer little episode happened. The man with the eyebrows began talking to me across the table in his usual fashion, full of his wearisome concession about the upper Amazons. I was trying to squash him as quietly as possible when I caught Amelia's eye. Her look amused me. She was engaged in making signals to Charles at her side to observe the little curate's curious sleeve links. I glanced at them and saw at once they were a singular possession to an unobtrusive person. They consisted each of a short gold bar with one arm in the link, fastened by a tiny chain to the same material to what seemed to be a tolerably experienced eye. A first-rate diamond. Pretty big diamonds, too, and of remarkable shape and brilliancy in cutting. In a moment, I knew what Amelia meant. She owned a diamond revers, said to be of Indian origin, but short by 2 stones for the circumference of her tolerably ample neck. Now she had long been wanting 2 diamonds like these to match her sets, but owing to the usual shape and antiquated cutting of her own gems, she had never been able to complete the necklace. At least, not without removing an extravagant amount from a much larger stone at the first water. The Scotch lass's eyes caught Amelia's at the same time, and she broke into a pretty smile of good-humored amusement. "Take it in another person, Dick dear," she exclaimed in her breezy way, turning to her husband. "Lady Vandrift is observing your diamond sleeve links." "They're very fine gems," Amelia observed incautiously. Most unwise admission if she desired to buy them. But the little pleasant curate was too transparently simple a soul to take advantage of her slip of judgment. "They are good stones," he replied. "Very good, considering. They're not diamonds at all, to tell you the truth. They're the best old-fashioned oriental paste. My great-grandfather bought them after a siege of Seringapatam for a few rupees, from a sepoy who had looted them from Tipu Sultan's palace. He thought, like you, he had got a good thing, but it turned out, when they came to be examined by experts, they were only paste. A very wonderful paste. I suppose that they are even imposed upon Tipu himself, so fine is the imitation, but they're worth, well, say, 50 shillings at the utmost." When he spoke, Charles looked at Amelia, and Amelia looked at Charles. Their eyes spoke volumes. The reverie was also supposed to have come from Tipu's collection. Both drew at once the identical conclusion. These were 2 of the same stones, very likely torn apart and disengaged from the rest of the melee in the capture of the Indian palace. "Can you take them off?" Sir Charles asked finally. He spoke in a tone that indicates business. "Certainly," the little curate answered, smiling. "I'm accustomed to take them off. They're always noticed. They've been kept in the family ever since the siege, a sort of valueless heirloom for the sake of the picturesqueness of the story, you know, and nobody ever sees them without asking, as you do, to examine them closely. They deceive even experts at first, but they're just paste all the same. Unmitigated oriental paste, for all that. He took them both off and handed them to Charles. No man in England has a finer judge of gems than my brother-in-law. I watched him narrowly. He examined them close, first with the naked eye, and then with the little pocket lens which he always carries. Admirable imitation, he muttered, passing them to Amelia. I'm not surprised they should impose upon inexperienced observers. But from the tone in which he said it, I could see at once that he had satisfied himself that they were real gems of unusual value. I know Charles's way of doing business so well. His glance to Amelia meant that these very stones had been so long been in search of. The Scotch lassie laughed a merry laugh. "He sees through them now, Dick," she cried. "I felt for sure Charles would be a judge of diamonds." Amelia turned them over. I know Amelia, too. I knew from the way Amelia looked at them that she meant to have them. And when Amelia means to have anything, people who stand in the way may as well spare themselves the trouble of opposing her. They were beautiful diamonds. We found out afterwards that the little curate's account was quite correct. These stones had come from the same necklace as Amelia's reverie, made from his favorite wife of Tipolis, who had presumably an expansive personal charms of her beloved sister-in-law. More perfect diamonds have seldom been seen. They have excited the usual admiration of thieves and connoisseurs. Amelia told me afterwards that, according to legend, the sepoy stole the necklet from the sack of the palace and then fought with another for it. It was believed that two stones got split in the scuffle and were picked up and sold by a third person, an onlooker, who had no idea of the value of his booty. Amelia had been hunting for them for several years to complete her necklet. "They are excellent paste," Sir Charles said, observing them, handing them back. "It takes a first-rate judge to detect them from the reality." Lady Vandrift has a necklet of much the same in character, but supposed of genuine stones. And as these are so much like them, and would complete her sets to all of the outward appearance, I wouldn't mind giving you, say, £10 for the pair of them. Mrs. Brabazon looked delighted. "Oh, sell them to him, Dick," she cried, "and buy me a brooch with the money. A pair of common links would do you just as well. £10 for two paste stones. It's quite a lot of money." She said it so sweetly in her pretty Scotch accent that I couldn't imagine how Dick had the heart to refuse her. But he did, all the same. "No, Jess, darling," he answered. "They're worthless, I know, but they have a certain sentimental value, as I've often told you. My dear mother wore them while she lived as earrings, and as soon as she died I had them brought as a set of links in order that I might always keep them about me. Besides, they have historical and family interests. Even a worthless heirloom, after all, is an heirloom." Dr. Hector Macpherson looked across and intervened. "There's a part on my concession," he said, "where we have a reason to believe a perfectly new Kimberley will soon be discovered. If at any time you care, Sir Charles, to look at my diamonds when I get them, it would afford me the greatest pleasure in life to submit them to your consideration." Sir Charles could stand it no longer. "Sir," he said, gazing across at him with an earnest air, "if your consideration were as full as the diamonds of Sinbad the Sailor's Valley, I would not care to turn my head to look at them. I am acquainted with the nature of the practice of salting." And he glared at the man with the overhanging eyebrows, as if he would devour him raw. Poor Dr. Hector Macpherson subsided instantly. We learnt a little later that he was a harmless lunatic, who went about the world with successive concessions for ruby mines and platinum reefs, because he had been ruined and driven mad by speculations of the two, and had recouped himself by imaginary grants in Burma and Brazil, or anywhere else that turned up handy. And his eyebrows, after all, were of nature's handicraft, They were sorry for the incident, but the man in Sir Charles's position is such a mark for rogues that if he did not take means to protect himself promptly, he would be forever overrun by them. When we went up to our salon that evening, Amelia flung herself on the sofa. "Charles," she spoke out in the voice of tragedy queen, "those are real diamonds, and I shall never be happy again until I get them." "They are real diamonds," Charles echoed, "and you shall have them, Amelia. They're worth not less than 3,000 pounds, but I shall bid them up gently." So, next day, Charles set to work to haggle with the curate. Brabazon, however, didn't care to be part with him. He was no money grubber, he said, and he cared more for his mother's gift and family tradition than a few £100, if Sir Charles were to offer it. Charles's eye gleamed. "But if I offer you 200, he said insinuatingly, "what opportunities for good? You could build a new wing to your village schoolhouse." "We have ample accommodation," the curate answered. "No, I don't think I'll sell them." Still, his voice faltered somewhat, and he looked down at them inquiringly. Charles was too precipitate. £200 more or less matters little to me, he said. And my wife has set her heart on them. It's every man's duty to please his wife, isn't it? Mrs. Brabazon, I offer you 300. The little Scotch girl clasped her hands. 300? Oh, Dick, just think of what fun we could have, and what good we could do with it. Do let them have him. Her accent was irresistible, but the curate shook his head. "Impossible," he answered. "My mother's earrings. Uncle Aubrey would be so angry if he knew that I sold them. Or I daren't face Uncle Aubrey." "He has expectations from Uncle Aubrey?" Sir Charles asked the White Heather. Mrs. Brabazon laughed. "Uncle Aubrey? Oh, dear, no. Poor dear old Uncle Aubrey. Why, the darling old soul hasn't a penny to bless himself with except his pension. He's a retired post captain." And she laughed melodiously. She was a charming woman. "Then I should disregard Uncle Aubrey's feelings," Sir Charles said decisively. "Oh, no," the curate answered. "Poor dear Uncle Aubrey. I wouldn't do anything that would annoy him. He'd be sure to notice it." We went back to Amelia. "Well, have you got them?" she asked. "No," Sir Charles answered, "not yet, but he's coming around, I think. He's hesitating now. He would rather like to sell them himself, but is afraid what Uncle Aubrey would say about the matter. His wife will talk him out of the needless consideration of Uncle Aubrey's feelings, and tomorrow we'll finally clinch the bargain." Next morning we stayed late in our salon, when we always breakfast, and did not come down to the public rooms till just after déjeuner, Sir Charles being busy with me over means of correspondence. We did come down. The concierge stepped forward and twisted a little feminine note to Amelia. She took it and read it. Her countenance fell. "There, Charles," she cried, handing it to him. "You've let the chance slip. I shall never be happy now. They've gone off with the diamonds." Charles seized the note and read it. And then he passed it on to me. It was short, but final. Thursday, 6 a.m. Dear Lady Vandrift, will you kindly excuse us having left so hurriedly without bidding you goodbye? We have just had a horrid telegram for Dick's favorite sister is dangerously ill, fever in Paris. I wanted to shake hands with you before we left. You've been all too sweet to us, and we will go by morning train absurdly early, and I wouldn't want the world to disturb you. Perhaps some day we may again, though, buried as we are in the North Country village, it isn't likely. But in any case, you have secured a grateful recollection. Yours truly, Jessie Barbazon. Yes, kindest regards to Sir Charles and the dear Wentworths.
And a kiss for yourself, if I may venture to send you one. She doesn't even mention where they've gone, Amelia exclaimed in a very bad humor. The concierge may know, Isabella suggested, looking over my shoulder. We asked at the office. Yes, the gentleman's address was Reverend Richard Pelope Brazelton, Home Bush Cottage, Eppingham, Northumberland. Any address where the papers might be sent at once in Paris. For the next 10 days, or till further notice, Hotel des Trois Mondes, Avenue de l'Arbre. Amelia's mind had been made up at once. Strike while the iron's hot, she cried. The sudden illness coming at the end of their honeymoon, involving 10 days' stay in an expensive hotel, will probably upset the curate's budget. He'll be glad to sell now. He'll get them for $300. And it was absurd of Charles to offer so much at first, but offered once, of course, we must stick to it. What do you propose to do? Charles asked. Write or telegraph? Oh, how silly men are, Amelia cried. This is the sort of business that can be arranged by letter and still less by telegram. No, Seymour must start off at once, taking the night train to Paris. And the moment he gets there, he must interview the curate and Miss Bresberton. Miss Bresberton's the best. She has none of the stupid sentimental nonsense about Uncle Aubrey.
It is no part of a secretary's duties to act as a diamond broker. But when Amelia puts her foot down, she puts her foot down. A fact which she is unnecessarily fond of emphasizing in that identical proposition. So the self-same evening saw me safe in the train on my way to Paris. The next morning I turned out of my comfortable sleeping car at the Carré de Strasbourg. My orders were to bring back those diamonds, alive or dead, so to speak, in my pockets to Lucerne, and to offer any needful sum, up to £2,500, for their immediate purchase. When I arrived at the Diamonds, I found the poor little curate and his wife both greatly agitated. They had sat up all night, they said, and their invalid sister, in the sleeplessness and suspense, certainly told upon them after being in a long railway journey. They were pale and tired. Mrs. Bresberton, in particular, looking ill and worried, too much like White Heather. I was more than half ashamed of bothering them about the diamonds at such a moment. But it occurred to me that Amelia was probably right. They would now have reached the end of the sum set apart for their continental trip, and the little ready cash might be far from unwelcome. I broached the subject delicately. It was a fad of Lady Vander's, I said. She had set her heart upon those useless trinkets, and she wouldn't go without them. She must and would have them, but the curate was obdurate. He threw Uncle Aubrey in my teeth. 300? No, never. A mother's present. Impossible, dear Jessie. Jessie begged and prayed. She had known and grown really attached to Lady Vander, she said, but the curate wouldn't hear of it. I went up tentatively to 400. He shook his head gloomily. It wasn't a question of money, he said. It was a question of affection. I saw it was no use trying to attack any longer. I struck out a new line. These stones, I said, I think I ought to inform you, are really diamonds. Sir Charles is certain of it. Now it is right for a man of your possessions to be wearing a pair of big gems like those worth several £100 as ordinary sleeve links. A woman, yes, I grant you. For a man, is it manly? And you a cricketer. He looked at me and laughed. Will nothing convince you, he cried. They've been examined and tested by half a dozen jewelers, and we know them to be paste. It wouldn't be right of me to sell them to you under false pretenses, however unwilling on my side. I couldn't do it. Well then, I said, going up a bit in my bids to meet them, I will put it like this. These gems are paste, but Lady Vandriff is quite unconquerable and unaccountable desire to possess them. Money doesn't matter to her. She is a friend of your wife's. As a personal favor, won't you sell them to her for 1,000? He shook his head.
It would be wrong, he said. It might even add criminal. But we take all risk, I cried. He was absolutely adamant. As a clergyman, he answered, I cannot do it. Will you try, Miss Brasberton? I asked. The pretty little Scotswoman leaned over and whispered. She coaxed and cajoled him. Her ways were winsome. I couldn't hear what she said, but he seemed to give way at last. I should love Lady Crankner to have them, she murmured, turning to me. She is such a dear. Then she took out the links from her husband's cuff and handed them across to me. How much? I asked. 2,000, she answered interrogatively. It was a big rise all at once, but such are the ways of women. Done, I said. Do you consent? The curate looked up as if ashamed of himself. I consent, he said slowly, since Jessie wishes it. But as a clergyman, and to prevent any further misunderstanding, I should like to give you a statement, in writing, that you buy them on my distinct and positive declaration that they are made of paste, old Oriental paste, and not genuine stones, that I do not claim any other qualities of them. I popped the gems into my purse, well pleased. Certainly, I said, pulling out a paper. Charles, with the unerring business instinct, had anticipated the request and given me a signed agreement to that effect. Will you take a check? I inquired. He hesitated. Notes of the Bank of France would suit me better, he answered. Very well, I will go out and get them. How very unsuspicious some people are. He allowed me to go off, with the stones in my pocket. Sir Charles had given me a blank check, not exceeding £2,500. I took it to our agents and cashed it for notes for the Bank of France. The curates classed them with pleasure, and right glad I was to go back to Lucerne that night, feeling that I had got those diamonds into my hands for £1,000 under their real value. At Lucerne railway station, Amelia met me. She was positively agitated. Have you brought them, Seymour? She asked. Yes, I answered, producing the spoils in triumph. Oh, how dreadful, she cried, drawing back. Do you think they're real? Are you sure he hasn't cheated you? Certain of it, I replied, examining them. No one can take me in the matter of diamonds. Why on earth should you doubt them? Because I've been talking to Miss O'Hannigan at the hotel. She says there's a well-known trick just like that. She's read of it in a book. The swindler has two sets, one real, one false. It makes you buy the false ones by showing you the real and pretending he sells them as a special favor. You needn't be alarmed, I answered. I'm a judge of diamonds. I shan't be satisfied, Amelia murmured, till Charles has seen them. We went up to the hotel. For the first time in her life, I saw Amelia really nervous as I handed the stones to Charles to examine. Her doubt was contagious. I half feared myself he might break into a deep monosyllabic interjection, losing his temper in haste, as he often does when things go wrong. But he looked at them with a smile, while I told him the price. £800 less than their value, he answered, well satisfied. You have no doubt of the reality? I asked. Not in the slightest, he replied, gazing at them. They are genuine stones, precisely in the same quality and type of Amelia's necklet. Amelia drew a sigh of relief. I'll go upstairs, she said, slowly. Bring down my own, for you both to compare them. 1 minute later, she rushed down breathless, Amelia so far from slim, and I never knew her before to exert herself to activity. Charles, Charles, she replied, do you know what dreadful thing has happened? 2 of my own stones are gone. He stole a couple of diamonds from my necklace and sold them back to me. She held out the reverie. It was all too true.
2 gems were missing, and these 2 just fitted the empty places. A light broke in upon me. I clapped my hands to my head. By Jove, I exclaimed. The little curate is Colonel Clay. Charles clapped his own hand to his brow in turn. And Jessie, he cried. White Heather, that sweet innocent Scotchman. I once detected a familiar ring in her voice, in spite of the charming Highland accents. Jessie is Madame Pickardette. We had obviously no evidence, but like the commissary at Nice, we felt instinctively sure of it. Sir Charles was determined to catch the rogue. His second depiction put him on his mettle. The worst of the man is, he said, he has a method. He doesn't go out of his way to cheat us. He makes us go out of our ways to be cheated. He lays a trap and we tumble headlong into it. Tomorrow, say, we must follow him to Paris. Emile explained to him what Miss Hannigan had said. Charles took it all in at once, and said sagaciously, That explains, he said, why the rascal uses a particular trick to draw on us by. If we had suspected him, he could have shown the diamonds were real, so we escaped detection. There was a blind draw of us to fact the robbery. We went to Paris to be out of the way when the discovery was made, and to get a clear day's start of us. What a consummate rogue! And to do me twice running! How did he get into my jewel case, though? Amelia exclaimed. That's the question, Charles answered. You do leave it about so. And why didn't he steal the whole rivery at once and sell other gems? I inquired. Too cunning, Charles replied. This was much better business. It isn't easy to dispose of a big thing like that. In the first place, the stones are large and valuable. In second place, they're well known. Every dealer has heard of the Vander's Reverie and seen pictures of the shape of them. They're marked gems, so to speak. No, he played a better game. He took a couple of them off and offered them to the only one person on the earth who was likely to buy them without suspicion. They came here meaning to work this very trick. He had the links made right before the stone beforehand, and then stole the stones and slipped them into their places. It's a wonderfully clever trick. Upon my soul, I almost admire the fellow. For Charles is a businessman himself, and can appreciate business and capacity of others. How Colonel Clay came to know about the necklace and the appropriate 2 of the stones we only discovered much later. I will not anticipate that disclosure, for one thing at a time is a good rule in life. For the moment, he succeeded in baffling us altogether. However, we followed him to Paris, telegraphing beforehand to the Bank of France to stop the notes. It was all in vain. They had been cashed within half an hour of my paying them. The curate and his wife, we found, quitted the Hotel de Desmondes for parts unknown the same afternoon. And, as usual with Colonel Clay, they vanished into space, leaving no clue behind them. In other words, they changed their disguise, no doubt, and reappeared somewhere else that night in altered characters. At any rate, no such person as Reverend Richard Pt7 was afterwards heard of, and, for the matter of that, no such village exists as Eppingham, Northumberland. We communicated the matter to the Parisian police. They were most unsympathetic. It is no doubt Colonel Clay, the officials whom we saw, but you seem to be little off ground of complaint against him. As far as I can see, monsieur, there is not much to choose between you. Monsieur le Chevalier desired to buy diamonds at the price of paste. You, madame, feared that you bought paste at the price of diamonds. You, monsieur, the secretary, tried to get the stones for an unsuspecting person for half their value. He took you all in, and that brave Colonel Catarac, it was diamond cut diamond. Which was true, no doubt, but by no means consoling. We returned to the Hotel Grand. Charles was fuming with indignation. This is really too much, he exclaimed. What an audacious rascal! But he will never again take me in, my dear say. I only hope we will try again. I would love to catch him. I know another time, for sure, in spite of her disguises.
It's absurd my being tricked twice running like this, but never again while I live. Never again, I declare to you. Jean de la Vive, a courtier in the hall, close by, murmured, responsive. We stood under the veranda at the Grand Hotel, in a big glass courtyard, and I verily believe the courier was really Colonel Clay himself, in one of his disguises. But perhaps we were beginning to suspect him everywhere. Mon Dieu, tricked twice, in one vacation. That would be kind of embarrassing. So, an African millionaire does seem like it would be an interesting set of series. Unfortunately, there are only 2 in this book. Okay, that sounded more like thunder instead of fireworks. But the smell of burnt sulfur is in the air. Let's see. Now I suppose the real question is, who to raid tonight? Now it's a firework. Oh, the jump love escapes. Oh well. Welcome in, Talca. Congrats on 3rd. Let's see. I don't see any of the other people reading tonight. I don't feel like writing ads. What's Rocco doing? Nope, wait. Let's say... Food of the Gods. HD Wells, that's pretty interesting. See a few people playing games. See, you know, I don't think I've actually rated Eevee for a while. I'll rate Eevee. Eevee's playing over scores online. Looks like she's... Well, I know she's playing with a few other people. What's playing? Let's see, Lulu, Fred, and Maddie. Okay. Yeah, let's rate them. Are they all streaming? Where am I seeing? Okay. Now that the window's open. Now let's go ahead and read Eevee. So there's my follower raid message. Sub raid message.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming by tonight. I will be streaming tomorrow, but I think Tuesday I'm heading to the mountains and we'll be gone for a week, so I won't be streaming next week. Well, at least not scheduled. I may stream from my phone just for the hell of it. So, I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Dodge fireworks and hopefully anything else launched in the air. And we'll go see Evie.
Warm within, keep you free from sin. To the sand.
I will see you later.